first dream for BookThinkers, which I don't detail in Rise of the Reader, but our first dream was to build a mobile application that would help people retain and implement more information from the books they're reading. Now, spoiler alert, that didn't work. But what I did do in anticipation of launching that application was I started to build a social media community with my team. So we would share the books we were reading on social media. We were looking to build a little bit of a following so that once we put the app out, we had people that would be interested that would sign up for it. So the app never happens, but what does happen is as I'm posting book reviews, the community is starting to grow. And I'm connecting with like-minded people that are reading the same books. They're in the comments section. They're following the account. I'm following them. And eventually authors started to reach out and say, hey, Nick, your audience is my target reader. I would love to pay for a book review. So that was really the first form of monetization. I didn't even think about it, but people started paying for book reviews.
Wow.
And, in the business books that I was reading, they would say, hey, every time you finish a paid engagement, you should ask that client, hey, is there anything else that I can help with? And so that's what I would do. I would ask these authors, hey, is there anything else that I can help with related to PR, book marketing, social media, podcasting? These are my interests. That's what my degree is in. And I'd love to just learn more. Let me know if I can help. And so we tried out tons of different things over time that didn't work and a few that did work. And now fast forward until today, BookThinkers has 8 people on the team, actually maybe closer to 10 now. It's funny that I don't know that, but yeah, maybe about 10 people on the team. And we work with over 100 authors a year in some type of paid capacity to help them put their books in the right hands so that they can change their readers' lives. And so that's the business I've built and sort of the life that I've started to live as a result of, just a fun idea to build an app that never worked.
It's such a profound and amazing story, like that, how it just organically evolved, and being able to do what you love doing and getting paid to do it. It must be such a good feeling, but at the same time, a fulfilling feeling, being able to impact more people globally by promoting these authors' books, which means it's getting into more people that can read and apply and make an impact in their lives.
Yes. I realized that Evan Carmichael too, I love bringing him up because he's had such an impact on me. He says that your purpose comes from your pain. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, I operated from a place of ego and insecurity. It wasn't a fun place to be. And I solved those problems by reading books. Now my business helps to serve that younger version of myself. That's my purpose. I want to help people overcome their problems by getting connected with the right resources. And today, that's books and podcasts. I love connecting my audience with a book that can solve their problem or a podcast interview that might help solve their problem or help them double down on the skill they're looking to learn. And yeah, that's where the magic happens.
That's awesome. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Unlocked from Within. Today, we have on the show Nick Hutchison. He stands as the visionary force behind BookThinkers, a growing 7-figure marketing agency that seamlessly bridges the worlds of authors and readers. In just over 7 years, he has organically built a platform that reaches over 1 million people each month. Nick's podcast, BookThinkers, Life-Changing Books, is a global top 2% show that features captivating interviews with world-class authors such as Grant Cardone, Lewis Howes, Alex Hormozi, Stephen Pressfield, Robert Greene, and many more thought leaders, to name a few. Through the use of his platform, Nick has helped hundreds of authors expand their reach to hundreds of millions of readers and drive significant revenue growth as part of their book campaigns. His services include short-form video production, podcast booking, and social media book reviews. Now, Nick has dedicated his life to helping millions of readers take action on the information they learn and rise to their potential through his books, speaking, and personal brand as a whole. This was the inspiration for his new book, Rise of the Reader, where he dives into strategies for mastering your reading habits and applying what you learn. It's a must-read book, which I highly recommend everyone to check out. It is very powerful and it's something that I think everyone needs in their toolkit. So let's welcome Nick to the podcast. Hey, Nick, welcome to Unlocked from Within.
Marty, I'm excited to be here.
It's awesome. It's awesome to have you on the show, and it's an honor to have someone like yourself on with what you've created with the BookThinkers podcast, the BookThinkers community, having such an active BookThinkers community, and now onto your next big thing, creating your book, Rise of the Reader. So I'd like to congratulate you on your successes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I've been fortunate enough to get to know you a little bit behind the scenes over the last year or so, and go through a little bit of your coaching, or however you would consider it. And so grateful for you too.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick. So I'd like to get straight into it. And, can you tell us a little bit about basically how it all came about, like the creation of BookThinkers?
Sure. So I was not much of a reader growing up. I was more of the jock stereotype, as we say over here. So I was captain of the wrestling team. I played football. I wasn't much of an academic, not much of a student. I didn't enjoy school. And going into my senior year of college or university, I took an internship with a local software company. And at that software company, I met my boss. His name was Kyle. He was the director of sales, and he introduced me to the world of podcasting. I had about an hour commute each way during that summer. And so I would listen to a lot of business style podcasts. And in those podcasts, just like this one, Marty, a host is interviewing a guest, and the guest would talk about what made them successful. And over and over and over and over again, I would listen to people give credit to the books that they were reading and the books that they had read in the past. And they gave a lot of their success credit to the books. And I'm sitting there in the car like, oh, another one that read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, another one that read Think and Grow Rich. And I wasn't willing to read these books. And one day it sort of hit me. If I'm choosing not to read these books, I'm literally choosing to live under my potential. So I didn't have too many responsibilities at that internship, but I had to be there for 8 hours and I had an office. So I went over one day during lunch, my local Barnes and Noble, sort of like list in hand, and I grabbed a bunch of the books that I had heard about, and I went back and I started reading. And that was how I fell in love with the world of personal development books. Books on personal finance, on habits, on selling, communication, philosophy, psychology, health, whatever. Like I was just obsessed with reading these books and implementing them. And that's kind of, that's the origin story of books. BookThinkers is a little bit of a longer conversation, but maybe we can pause there to see if you have any follow-up questions on that experience.
Yeah, I'd say it's, so how old would you have been when you picked up your first personal development book? Like how old would you have been in that role?
Yeah, I think I was 20 years old, maybe just turned 21, something like that.
Yeah. And up until then, would have you ever picked up a book before, whether it was in personal development or in an other field that you're actually interested in?
No. When I was much younger, I'm talking like, I don't know, 12 or something like that, I read a few fantasy style, like medieval Knights and Dragons style books and stuff like that. But no, I was never much of a reader. In fact, even when I was in high school and college and I was supposed to be reading books, I was always looking for shortcuts. Like you couldn't get me to read anything. So I'd go online and I'd look for summaries on YouTube, or I'd look at Spark Notes. That was the website that we used to use that would summarize the books that you had to read in school and give you the highlights. Or I'd ask my friends for their notes in school. So yeah, I did everything I could to avoid reading books before that.
I think it's similar to the journey I had. Like I think it was 16 when my dad gave me my first personal development book, and that was How to Win Friends and Influence Others. And I was having a real hard time in school at that time. I felt like a teacher was picking on me. It might have looked different from his perspective at that time. He might have been just, toughening me up. But what came about of that shitty situation, I guess I could say, looking back on it, was it introduced me. I was telling Dad about how I was struggling, and he could see I had such a bad attitude as well. And he said, "Look, maybe give this book a chance and give it read it." And I read it and I had to read it, I think, 3 times for it to really sink in, because up until that point, I just really didn't have much interest in any books or couldn't see the benefit in any books. And I don't know if it was because I was a little bit handicapped with, I got found out and discovered I couldn't read until I was 8 years old. So I just really don't know if I could see how it was benefiting me. So yeah, it's pretty interesting hearing and speaking and interviewing people of successes that they've gotten into reading at a later age.
Yeah, there's a strange thing. My only experience with the public education system is in the United States, but there's a strange thing where if you're told to read and you're penalized for not reading, you learn to dislike reading. Now, I say this because it's a term that I heard in a spoken word poem on YouTube once, but I sort of hated school, but I loved education. And what's unfortunate about that is school started to teach me to hate education a little bit too. It was like, to avoid failure. Like, what a dumb idea. Failure is where all of our growth comes from. Yet we're taught if you fail, you're going to get made fun of. I mean, it's so backwards. And so, yeah, I think that school is the reason that I disliked reading, funny enough.
Yeah.
I think that most people feel that way. Most people don't read a book after they graduate school.
Yeah. Yeah.
For the rest of their life. That's crazy.
Yeah. I have to say I'm in the same boat there. Like, yeah, I just found, I didn't find the fun of learning. I lost the fun of learning, which is interesting because I love learning things I'm interested in. So yeah, definitely insightful. So from there on, like, it like, did it take a few times to pick up that book, or was it the first time, you read it what was the very first book?
Well, the first book was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And it took me maybe a week to read it. I was taking a lot of notes and I was sitting back and thinking like, wow, over and over and over again. So that book means different things to different people. For me, Robert Kiyosaki taught me that books condense decades of lived experience into days of reading. He taught me that personal finance is a subject that's not typically taught in the school system, not where I'm from, not when I went to school. It's only taught in the home. And if, like most people, you come from a poor or middle-class family, you're going to learn poor or middle-class money habits from your parents. The only way to learn rich money habits is by reading a book from somebody who's rich, like Robert Kiyosaki. And so that book was only 200 pages, pretty simple read, very basic language, but it helped me completely see money from a different perspective. It helped give some language to things that I didn't even know were happening as far as money and investing and owning a business were concerned. And so I was hooked, like right from the very beginning. And then I started to read a bunch of other books on personal finance, like The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey, which is a completely different perspective on investing. And then I read The Richest Man in Babylon by George S. Clason. And then I got into some general habit style books like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I don't think there's been a week since then where I haven't read something.
Wow. And that's a powerful book. Like, that is, I'd have to say that's in my top 10, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because of exactly what you said, just seeing it from a completely different perspective and lens. And in Australia, we're not taught about money in school in that way. When I was in school, it could have changed now. So yeah, it's a very profound, very powerful book, I believe. It's a timeless classic too.
Yeah, I think so too. Over 30 million copies of that book have been sold. And I mean, my copy's been read by 5 different people. So who knows how many people have read that book. But
yeah,
I was fortunate enough to actually meet the co-author of the book that nobody really knows about. Her name is Sharon Lecter.
Wow.
And Sharon, I thanked her for writing the book. I said, thank you so much for writing the book. And she said, don't thank me. 30 million, maybe 40 million people have read that book, but only a small amount of them have used it to take action and improve their lives. So pat yourself on the back. Don't thank me. And, that's why I wrote my book too, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later, Rise of the Reader. It's because only by taking action on the information that we learn does it truly help our lives. Otherwise, it's just entertainment. And unfortunately, for probably like 30 million of the people that read Rich Dad Poor Dad out of the 35 or 40. That's all it was. It was a form of entertainment. It was interesting, but it didn't change anything for them.
Powerful. And that can, that's the same with if you're going to a workshop or a seminar. Like, what are you taking out of it? What are the insights and how are you applying it in your day-to-day life? So with those first few books that you picked up in personal development, like looking back on those years when you picked those books up and read them, like how soon, if you could measure like the impact those books were having from consuming them and reading them, that it had in the changing the direction of your life in a positive way?
There are different steps along that journey. So step number one, I realized that I had unfulfilled potential. And a lot of people run away from that. I decided to run towards it, full speed ahead. And so from that perspective, almost immediately, I mean, reading that first book was a very eye-opening experience for me. And so from day one, I thought, wow, I'm capable of doing so much more than I currently am. And all I have to do is read these $20 books, spend a few hours reading them and implement what they teach me, and I'll get closer. So that was kind of step number one. Step number two, I ended up going full-time with that company once I graduated college. And I had a full-time sales role and an opportunity to make quite a bit of money. So I started reading books on sales, negotiation, persuasion, effective communication, like the book you mentioned, How to Win Friends and Influence People, all those types of books. And I started applying what I was learning to my sales process, to my communication, to closing. And as a result of that, I started to make more money. So that was kind of step number two was, not only am I excited about my future, I'm leveraging anticipation, like this version of myself that I know I can build, but I'm also starting to make more money because of the books that I'm reading. So that was kind of like step number two. And from there, I mean, there have been so many other steps along the way. So, I suppose it didn't take too long. Here's the other thing that I didn't realize until I decided to write my book and I had to go back and think about what happened and really reflect on it. The software that I was selling had an implementation package that would go with it. So we would sell this software to a company, and then they would spend anywhere between a few weeks and a few months implementing the software. And so I just did the same thing with the books I was reading. I would spend a few weeks or a few months implementing the books that I was reading. And it didn't occur to me that that was weird until I was on a business trip with Kyle, my boss at that company who introduced me to podcasting. And we were sitting at the bar having a drink. And I remember him asking me about my process. He's like, dude, you're going through these books like crazy. You're loving them. Like, what's your process look like? And I told him about it. And he said, so many people don't read. Of those that do, not many take notes. Of those that take notes, not many actually implement them. So he's like, you're doing something really interesting here. And, we should explore that more. And so, that's one of the early conversations that I started to have about BookThinkers, because, books have the power to change your life in a crazy way and can happen. I know that was a lot of information, Marty, but, it's kind of how it happened for me.
Yeah, powerful. And like that. And so did that come naturally to you to just go, I'm going to take notes reading that book the first time? Like, in what ways were you taking notes? Were you like going like a couple steps further, not just highlighting sections in the book, but like what else were you doing in ways of taking notes?
Yeah, it's sometimes hard for me when I look back on that time to remember exactly what happened because I don't have any of those notes anymore, unfortunately. But I think when I first started, I think that I would underline and highlight things in the book. And then I heard a podcast once where the person being interviewed said that he got rid of his TV and he just put up bookshelves. And what he would do each time he would finish a book is he'd go back, he'd find his biggest takeaways from the book, and he would write them on the inside cover, on the front or the back. And then instead of watching TV, he'd go back through a couple of the old books that he had read in years prior, and he would review his notes. And so I started to do a little bit of that. Tim Ferriss also put out a video once very early on about note taking, and he would take notes and write them on the inside cover of the book. So I had a couple people influencing me to start doing that. Around that same time as well, I met a guy named Kevin Horsley, and Kevin wrote a book called Unlimited Memory. And in that book, Kevin says that repetition leads to retention. So I think very early in my journey, I was looking online for ways to get more out of the books that I was reading. And it was reading, highlighting, taking notes, rewriting those notes, because that's a form of repetition and getting to know the information. And then I found myself talking about these books all the time to other people at work, with my family, on social media. And so when I would read, I started to read with the intention of teaching other people, not book reviews yet. That was still too far out, but like teaching other people, summarizing the information. And that's another form of repetition. You know, it sort of reworks itself in your brain so that you can teach other people. And all of that sort of happened like within the first 6 months, maybe.
Wow. Wow. And like, I know we'll get into your book a bit later, Rise of the Reader, which I really loved reading, with the value, the tools, the strategies to try. At what point did, like, in part of taking notes in books, like with the Post-it notes, sticking the Post-it notes around, when did that come on a little bit later in the journey?
Yes, it did. Yeah, that came a little bit later in the journey. You know, even before I started reading these books, I started collecting quotes, like motivational quotes. So I've actually never talked about this on a podcast before. But when I was a junior in college, maybe even a sophomore, I think I was a junior, I took a stack of index cards, and every time I came across a motivational quote on like Facebook or something, I would write it down. I'd put a little piece of double-sided tape on it, and I would put it on my wall. And I would reread these motivational quotes from time to time. That was before I even discovered the world of podcasting.
Wow.
And so that was kind of the first iteration of my sticky notes. It actually came before the books that I was reading. And if you had walked into my college dorm room towards the end of my junior year, I filled up an entire wall. There were probably like 200 quotes that I hand wrote. And sometimes I'd have like friends over and stuff, and they'd ask me about it, and I'd say, write your favorite quote, and I'll put it on my wall. So it was kind of like a collage of motivation. And I just remembered that I did that for the first time in a long time. I haven't thought about that in years. Otherwise, I probably would have put it in my book somewhere.
Yeah, it's so cool. Like, I just think it's, you know, like if you can put it in places that you can just see, where you know, in the general places, whether that's in the shower or the toilet, on the mirror, or in front of your computer desk, or even in your car, you can always have those really good reminders.
Yeah, I like to call them play bigger triggers. And that's something I got from Evan Carmichael. And so a play bigger trigger for me is an environmental cue that reinforces the person that you'd like to become. And whether that's a t-shirt, it's a trinket on your desk, it's a Post-it note, it's a motivational background wallpaper on your phone. It can come in so many different forms. I mean, the books behind me, they reinforce the person that I'm trying to become. And my subconscious takes in all of this information visually most of the time. I mean, my tattoos, they're play bigger triggers. So yeah, I love just building an environment that supports the person I want to become, not an environment that makes it more difficult.
Awesome. And yeah, like one of your takeaways in Rise of the Reader that I really loved, and I think I definitely will implement, is the think bigger on the t-shirt. How can I think bigger today? That's just an awesome bit of piece there. Like, tell us about that.
Yeah, I at one point I actually bought, because I found the shirt online, I bought a shirt that just said think bigger or think big or something like that. And I bought it in 5 different colors. And I would just wear these t-shirts every single day, you know, until I did my laundry for a period of time, because I was really just trying to not force myself, but I was just trying to step into my potential, be the boldest version of myself, think bigger, be bigger, act bigger. And every little thing helps. when you're in that space to reinforce the person you're becoming. And so I would wear those t-shirts and I would see them on Zoom calls, while I was on a sales call, because I'm looking at myself, like, you know what I mean? I'd see it in the mirror whenever I'd go to the bathroom. I'd see it when I'm putting it on and taking it off, or when I look down at my chest. And also whenever I was out in public, sometimes people would stop me and ask me about the shirt, because it's not something that you see all the time. And so, yeah, it would start interesting conversations too.
Powerful. And so going back to the journey, so where did you go on from there?
Well, my friend Alec and I started BookThinkers together. And then very early in that business, we brought in another one of my friends, Derek. They're no longer part of the day-to-day BookThinkers stuff, but they started the business with me. And our first dream for BookThinkers, which I don't detail in Rise of the Reader, but our first dream was to build a mobile application that would help people retain and implement more information from the books they're reading. Now, spoiler alert, that didn't work. But what I did do in anticipation of launching that application was I started to build a social media community with my team. So we would share the books we were reading on social media. We were looking to build a little bit of a following so that once we put the app out, we had people that would be interested that would sign up for it. So the app never happens, but what does happen is as I'm posting book reviews, the community is starting to grow. And I'm connecting with like-minded people that are reading the same books. They're in the comment section. They're following the account. I'm following them. And eventually authors started to reach out and say, hey, Nick, your audience is my target reader. I would love to pay for a book review. So that was really the first form of monetization. I didn't even think about it, but people started paying for book reviews.
Wow.
And, in the business books that I was reading, they would say, hey, every time you finish a paid engagement, you should ask that client, hey, is there anything else that I can help with? And so that's what I would do. I would ask these authors, hey, is there anything else that I can help with related to PR, book marketing, social media, podcasting? These are my interests. That's what my degree is in. And I'd love to just learn more. Let me know if I can help. And so we tried out tons of different things over time that didn't work and a few that did work. And now fast forward until today, BookThinkers has 8 people on the team, actually maybe closer to 10 now. It's funny that I don't know that, but yeah, maybe about 10 people on the team. And we work with over 100 authors a year in some type of paid capacity to help them put their books in the right hands so that they can change their readers' lives. And so that's the business I've built and sort of the life that I've started to live as a result of, just a fun idea to build an app that never worked.
It's such a profound and amazing story, like that, how it just organically evolved, and being able to do what you love doing and getting paid to do it. It must be such a good feeling, but at the same time, a fulfilling feeling, being able to impact more people globally by promoting these authors' books, which means it's getting into more people that can read and apply and make an impact in their lives.
Yes. I realized that Evan Carmichael too, I love bringing him up because he's had such an impact on me. He says that your purpose comes from your pain. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, I operated from a place of ego and insecurity. It wasn't a fun place to be. And I solved those problems by reading books. Now my business helps to serve that younger version of myself. That's my purpose. I want to help people overcome their problems by getting connected with the right resources. And today, that's books and podcasts. I love connecting my audience with a book that can solve their problem, or a podcast interview that might help solve their problem or help them double down on the skill they're looking to learn. And yeah, that's where the magic happens.
That's awesome. I think I saw in one of your posts while you were on holidays in Europe, the waiter reached out and knew who you were. So that must be a cool feeling that you're like, wow, you're on the other side of the world and you're making such an impact in that person's life.
Yeah, that was a mind-blowing experience. And it reminds me that impact is only felt through feedback. So somebody like me can, last month on Instagram, we had 1 million impressions. Great. But unless people reach out and say, hey, this is working, you don't really know. Yeah, you believe that you're helping people, but you don't really know. And so that's why I love getting messages from people that say, hey, these books have impacted my life. And so, yeah, the quick story on that, I know you've already read it, but for your audience, is that Rachel, my wife, and I were honeymooning in Croatia. We were in Dubrovnik, which is a small city, but we were even outside of Dubrovnik in like a small little village area outside of it. And we were walking back from having a couple of drinks at a cool water restaurant. And we just stopped into this restaurant real quick to ask if we could make a reservation for the following night. And they were already closing up. And I found a waiter. He was walking by and I just said, hey, can I make a reservation for tomorrow evening? And he looked up and sort of nonchalantly was just like, yeah, sure. By the way, I'm a huge fan. And I'm like, he has no idea who I am. He's mistaken me for someone else. Like, what do you mean you're a huge fan? And he said, of BookThinkers. I said, wow, that's cool. And Rachel's like, somebody just recognized you in this random country on the other side of the planet. And he proceeds to tell us all of these very detailed, intricate things that he's learned from BookThinkers over time and about how meaningful it's for his life. And it was just such a cool experience. And then we went back the next night, we had dinner and we got to hang out with him for another hour. And what a wonderful experience. So yeah, you never know, but definitely people are out there getting impacted.
Oh, that's priceless. Like the mission you're on, at least you got that feedback on the other side of the world. Obviously I'm in Australia with my Australian audience, so it must give you, confidence that you're on the right path with the mission and your vision that you're creating and continue to create.
Yeah, one day I'm sure I'll be touring through Australia and somebody will say, hey, I saw you on Marty's podcast and I decided to read Rise of the Reader and it changed my life. And I'll be like, let's go.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So like with the audience, you were saying like how you started getting paid to read books from these authors, but in that period, just to give a bit of context to the audience, like you still had your day job bringing in cash flow. So did BookThinkers start as a bit of a side hustle?
Yes. And it stayed a side hustle for a long time, a very long time. And as you know a little bit from behind the scenes, I didn't make the full-time jump until I already had full-time employees in the business. So BookThinkers, like I knew that slow and steady wins the race. One of my mentors, I mentioned him earlier, Kevin Horsley, the author of Unlimited Memory, he told me, Nick, if you jump too soon and you don't have enough of a nest egg and you don't have a foundation in the business, you're going to operate from a place of scarcity when you need to earn money. You'll compromise on your values. You'll make decisions that you'll end up regretting. He said, keep your full-time job, do your best to automate it, do your best to work on BookThinkers during those hours when you can, and build a solid foundation. So I did that. I built BookThinkers to a place where it was operating successfully, and doing it that way forced me to automate, delegate, eliminate low impact activity, hire people to solve some of my problems. And I didn't officially make the jump until the business was doing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in revenue, which sounds kind of goofy, but it worked out for me that way.
That's so awesome. And so like, I guess to a listener that has a business or wanting to start a business, like if looking back, like how many years did you think that was on when you did make the jump and left your paying job that was, paying your bills, keeping you afloat so you can focus on creating your dream? Like, was it like over a 4-year span before you made it and switched it to full time?
So technically speaking, BookThinkers was formed as a business in 2017. Didn't really do anything that year. 2018, we started posting on social media. Didn't really do anything that year. 2019 started to take money in exchange for paid book reviews. So 19, 20, 21, 22. So yeah, it was really about a 4-year period of doing paid book reviews and starting to try out other services. And then earlier this year, 2023, finally cut ties and went full-time into the business. And like I said, already had full-time employees and The year before did a couple 100,000 in revenue. So I think sometimes businesses fail. Like Michael Gerber, the E-Myth Revisited, he says 95% of small businesses fail within the first 5 years. Why is that? I think it's because too many people take a jump too soon into their own business, and as a result, it fails. So I went very conservatively, and I think that some of that was a scarcity mindset in my own personal life, which you've helped me overcome. But some of it was just got to play the smart game, the long game.
Yeah, it's interesting because with one of my businesses, NFPD Snowbrand, it was born in 2017 also, but really didn't do much with it the first year. I was working in Japan in Niseko with my wife, so we could go snowboarding for pretty much the whole winter. And people would be coming up in the bars and that they'd see me wearing, see the logo and stuff. Said, "Oh, where can we buy it from?" And that gave me the decision. All right, I've got to take it to the next stage, set up a website and that. But what I did the full 360 of what you did. And we came back to Australia and I went into it full time. But I had about 28,000 saved up, and we just burnt through that. So I dedicated full time, burnt the bridges. Looking back, I do wish I would have taken your approach to it. So we've still got the business, it's still there, but the roller coaster was so extreme because we were forcing it to make our daily income, putting food on the table, paying the bills. And I believe it takes a lot of focus away from what you're trying to truly create.
It does. Yeah, as you know, when you're operating from a place of scarcity, it can cloud your decision making. And I think that, the best decisions I've made are when I'm completely in control. I'm totally calm. I'm at peace and I'm thinking. And it's hard to think when you're running 24/7 trying to put food on the table, right? So, yeah, most people do what you did, by the way. And I'm happy, obviously, that your business is still running successfully, but that doesn't happen for everybody. Most people, they end up burning out and they end up giving up.
Well, that's it. Like, I guess what the purpose of this podcast series is to anyone that's thinking of starting a business or has an existing business, and the self-doubt that comes up, the feelings of wanting to quit, feeling burnt out, or just because you're constantly putting out fires each day. Which fires do you want to be putting out, and at what cost is this vision and dream going to be? So I think it's powerful to hear different perspectives on it, like how you created and how you've birthed BookThinkers, and creating the foundations.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it was a little bit of a roller coaster, but what's nice is that roller coaster didn't impact my day-to-day life, like outside of the business. I think having a solid relationship to fall back on, having a solid income at my full-time job to fall back on, having a solid relationship with myself to fall back on, it's great that my business overlaps with personal development because I'm always working on myself, stoicism, being able to withstand the emotional roller coaster, having a solid friend group and accountability group. And so when things weren't great with the business, everything else sort of supported me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I know you got some really good tips in the book of Rise of the Reader of, how to, on meditation, on breath work, cold and ice bath therapy. Like, when did that all come about, those habits on your day-to-day life?
They slowly crept in. I mean, I've been meditating now really since 2017 when I started reading these books. And but more recently I've taken more interest in being a guinea pig, trying all of these health tricks. I know you're very experienced with helping people through cold plunges and breath work. So yeah, I've become mostly interested in these subjects. I think over the last 24 months, maybe 2 years ago is when I really dove into this space, started tracking steps with a Fitbit, years and years ago. And then I got an Aura ring for tracking my sleep. And I just, I feel like every month I'm adding something new to my biohacking world.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like there was one of the things that stood out in Rise of the Reader, your book, another thing I'll be implementing is you talk about it's called a snake plant and having them
Yes.
air purifier in your bedroom while you sleep or around the office. So yeah, I'm like, what is a snake plant? So I Googled it the other day.
Yeah, I have it would be too hard for me to shift my camera around, but I have 6 of them over here, and they just sit there and they purify the air. But on top of that, I also have a literal air purifier, like a HEPA purifier. So take advantage of both of them.
Yeah, yeah. And so, so the journey from there, like then you created a podcast where, it's what episode are you up to now? Like how many episodes have you created for the audience?
It's fully outsourced.
Yep.
So I don't know how many have been posted right now. I think about 125, maybe 130, something like that.
So 125, we'll just say 120 to 130 episodes. But what's amazing about the podcast series, the Book Thinkers podcast series, is the quality of guests that you've had on. So can you tell us a bit about that? Like you've had Grant Cardone on, you've had Lewis Howes on, Alex Hormozi, and the list goes on.
Yeah. I started the podcast as a way to embrace discomfort. I could review these books from behind the scenes, but having conversations with those authors, now that's a whole different ballgame. Right around the time that I started the podcast, I had noticed that some of my favorite authors were already following BookThinkers. Once I reviewed their books, they would follow and they would engage in the comment section. And so I knew right off the bat that I could go out there and work with some of my favorite authors. In episode number 1, Evan Carmichael, author of Built to Serve and a number of other books, he's a big YouTuber. He told me, hey, use my name. Anytime you want to pitch like yourself to somebody else, if they follow me, make sure you mention that in your pitch, because trust is transitive. If they trust me and I trust you, they're more likely to trust you, sort of draw that connection. And maybe they'll even bypass the due diligence process. Maybe they'll just look at the fact that I've been on your show. They won't ask how many downloads. They won't even look at your profile. They'll just say yes. Because if Evan says yes and they know Evan, they'll say yes too. And so that was a really interesting episode number 1 for me. He said that on air.
Wow.
And I thought, well, Evan's worked with most of the people that I want to work with. So I started to do that. There was something else that I started to do very early on, which was I tried to be a surgeon with my words. What I mean by that is that surgeons don't make extra cuts while performing surgery. It's not necessary. And salespeople shouldn't use extra words while they're selling. It's not necessary. And so I might just say to somebody, hey, I'd like to help promote your book by interviewing you on my podcast. I recently had Evan Carmichael on. Here's a link to book. That's it. I don't need to sell anything other than that. I just need to say, hey, I want to help you sell your book. And I've had Evan on my show. And then as the podcast started to grow, I could look at who somebody followed on Instagram, and maybe I could mention 3 or 4 names. And I'd always pick the biggest 3 or 4. So that was kind of like number 1. Number 2, I read a book called The Third Door by Alex Banayan. He has this wonderful metaphor about a nightclub. He says, with a nightclub, there's always 3 ways to get in. There's door number 1. That's where most people enter the nightclub. General admission. You got to pay a cover. You got to wait in a long line. Maybe you won't even get in. Door number 2, it's a little bit tougher. That's the VIP door. You got to know somebody. You got to already be famous. That's kind of tough to use, especially when you're first starting out. Or there's door number 3. There's always a third door. That's the purpose of the book. In the case of the nightclub, that might mean going in through the kitchen window, army crawling through the kitchen and popping up in the back of the club. But here's the thing, you're still in the club. And so I had to use the third door to get that initial momentum moving. And so Grant Cardone was episode, I think like number 9
Wow.
on the podcast.
Wow.
Yeah. And so with Grant, what I did was I don't know what exists today, but on one of his websites, I saw that you could submit for Grant to speak at your event. And I think the lowest tier was like 25 grand. So I just checked the box. I just wanted somebody to email me and have a call with me about it. I didn't have any money to spend, but I just wanted to learn, what are they looking for? And so I check that box and I get an email, and then I tell that person, hey, I actually don't have any money, but I have an audience of people that would love to learn from Grant. All I'm asking for is 30 minutes of his time, and he can sell anything he wants. By the way, I'll move worlds to make this happen. So you name a time and I'll do it. And of course they said no. And then I started to work through LinkedIn and email some other people on his team because I had the nomenclature of how they built their emails. And eventually somebody said yes. So Grant comes on the podcast. I'm sitting here shaking. I'm all nervous. We record it. And at the end, I said, hey, Grant, I'm going to be in Miami sometime soon. I'd love to film an in-person podcast with you at your studio. My audience would get a kick out of seeing us together. And he's riding the high of just being on the show. So he says, yeah, sure, whatever, man. That sounds good. And I'm still recording. And so I chopped that little clip. I sent it to his team. I said, hey, I'll be there all of November. What date works for you? They give me a date. Now, here's the secret. I wasn't going to be there in November. But now that I had a date to film with Grant Cardone, I'm going to book my tickets. So I flew down and I filmed with Grant, and just being pictured with him, borrowing his credibility, has moved worlds, to use that term again. It's done wonders for my business because everybody wants to be like Grant. Everybody wants to have the audience like Grant. Everybody wants to feel energy like Grant. And I've used his name to book a lot of other people that want to be like him. And so, that's kind of the roadmap that I used. And, obviously I lead with value. Hey, I'd like to help promote your book to an audience that may not be aware of it. You can sell anything you want. And I've interviewed all these people that you know. Here's a link to book. And then, boom, booked. It's happened so many times like that. So just like you said, a lot of big names, a lot of my heroes, people that both of us look up to, like Stephen Pressfield and Robert Greene, Ryan Holiday. There's just, so many wonderful people out there willing to share their message if you can get in front of them.
And yeah, it's an amazing story. And what I love about it is if anyone's thinking of creating a podcast, it doesn't have to be that overwhelming to start. Like for me, starting my podcast, I basically broke it down and just went on YouTube, how to start a podcast, how much does it cost to start a podcast, and to get going, I've just built it up by doing the Zoom version, obviously because I'm in Australia for now. So if anyone thinks like, oh, I've got to just do in person, I'm not going to start. You can just do it via Zoom or other platforms and pretty it up so it doesn't look like a black background. So I think I only spent $500 to get starting. What about yourself?
Yeah, I bet I did. Yeah, I bet I did the same. I bought a Yeti mic, and that was only about $150. I don't know if I spent any other money, and maybe I got mine started for $150.
Yeah.
Maybe I bought a pair of headphones or something with it.
Yeah, that's it, right? And the flip side to this, the beauty of it is you're getting a whole, whether it's an hour or a little bit more of one-on-one intimate time with the movers and shakers of the world. Like if people don't know who Grant Cardone, a multi-billionaire, like it's a powerful way. How else? The only other way, if you want to have time with these people, because time is the thing that's priceless, is you've got to go to their events. You got to get on a plane and go travel wherever they are.
Yeah, you may have seen a story online since you follow these people, but Alex Hormozi, his wife Layla, purchased a few consulting sessions with Grant Cardone for him early on because Alex wanted to know how to do better on social media. It was $120,000 for 3 1-hour sessions. That's how much Grant's time is worth. $40,000 a session, $40,000 an hour.
Yeah.
And Alex Hormozi had to pay that, and I didn't.
Yeah.
Because I had a podcast to interview him on. How cool is that? I just saved myself 40 grand. And it's the same process. Alex Hormozi shows up on that $40,000 consultation and just sits there and asks questions, and Grant answers them. Same thing you do on a podcast. You show up, you ask questions, and Grant answers them.
Yeah.
And so, save myself a lot of money starting a podcast that way, because their consultation costs a lot of money. And then having Alex Hormozi on the podcast was like coming full circle with it too. His interview on our show really took off. It got us monetized on YouTube by itself. It's been watched for 10,000 hours. And so sometimes having the big names on, does wonders for your brand.
Yeah, it's powerful. And like, I guess what I want to emphasize to the listeners is like you said, like, you don't need to go to start off. If you just want to make a change in your day-to-day life, change in your life, to shift something, to create positive momentum, you can start with just buying a book, one of the books of these authors for $20 or $25. And if you don't have that, if you can't afford that, then just listen to a podcast that they're interviewed on. Like, the power of that podcast is very powerful, even though it might look like it's a free thing.
Yeah, I've never met most of my mentors, even on Zoom, right? I just read their books or listen to them on other people's shows. I'm a big fan of shows like the Joe Rogan Experience, JRE. I listen to a lot of the Tim Ferriss podcast. I listen to the Huberman Lab and, Peter Attia's show. So like a lot of these podcasts, that's the places that I listen to and consume the most content.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so going further on the journey. So like, tell us about, what was the inspiration of creating the book Rise of the Reader?
Marty, every single time somebody would reach out to me and say, "Hey, Nick, I'm having a problem translating information into action. I know that you're doing it. How are you doing it?" And I do my best to answer those people with like a voice note, or I type something out, but I knew I was under delivering. Like, I knew I had more to offer than just a quick voice note or a few paragraphs. And so an opportunity came where a self-publishing services company basically said, "Hey, we want to partner with you. We'll give our services in exchange for you putting an ad in the book." And I was like, that's pretty cool. I can get all this stuff done for free. What do I want to write my book on? Of course, I want to write it on how to take information and translate it into action more efficiently, because that's what my audience wants. That's the biggest demand. And so I started writing it 3 years ago.
Wow.
And it's taken me 3 years of working on it from time to time. Sometimes it would fall in the priority list and I wouldn't work on it for a month or two. And then sometimes I'd get a ton of inspiration for like what else I wanted to include. And I'd write and write and write for a week straight. And so the result is what I do to take information and translate it into action. One of my favorite quotes that I've really only discovered recently, otherwise I would have put it in the book too, is that action is the real measure of intelligence. It's a quote from Napoleon Hill. Only by taking action on the information that we learn does it change our lives. And so I want to help other people who are struggling with that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Like, I feel like one of the big takeaways from the book Rise of the Reader that, was if someone has a hard time with being motivated or inspired to pick up a book to read, like you say in there, just give you a goal of just reading 10 pages a day, or 10 pages in the morning and 10 pages at night. And I feel that's a beautiful strategy and technique, because you don't feel as overwhelmed, especially if you come across books that are that thick, and you're like, whoa.
Yeah, the math is fun there. And I know you've read it, but if you just replace, so it goes back to this question, like, "Hey, Nick, I can't find the time to read." Well, instead of trying to find time, because you're probably using all 24 hours already, replace low impact activities like 15 minutes of Netflix or scrolling through social media in the morning and 15 minutes of Netflix in the evening with reading a good book. And for a beginner, if you read for 15 minutes, you'll probably read 10 pages. If you do that in the morning and the evening, 5 days a week, that's 100 pages a week. All of a sudden, if books are only 200 or 300 pages, you're reading a book every 2 or 3 weeks. That's a lot. And so
Mm.
that's where the magic starts to happen. You can get a lot done in just 15 pages in the morning, 15 pages in the evening.
Yeah, very powerful. And like one of the other things I think you say in there, which if I'm a little bit short on time, is between, reading, whether it's an ebook or a hard copy book, I'll listen to the audio version, whether that's in the car or if I've got to catch a train or in the taxi or while I'm running. I love that. One of the things I love doing when I go for a jog or run is put a podcast on, podcast or an audio book. But one of the things you do say in there is read the physical copy of it or the ebook, but also read the audio at the same time. So that's pretty different.
Yeah, it is. Jim Quick wrote a book called Limitless. And in his book, Limitless, he talks about this cool metaphor, driving a car. He says, if you're driving slowly through a neighborhood, you can get distracted. You can look at, people playing in the yard. You can look at houses. You can notice maybe like some landscaping. You can notice other cars. You can look at license plates. But imagine you're speeding through that neighborhood, top speed. Your eyes are glued on the road. You don't have time to daydream. And I think the same thing happens with a book. Most of us don't read fast enough. And so our brains aren't being fully used and our minds start to wander. But what playing an audiobook does in the background while you're reading a physical book, what it does is it keeps you moving. Because if you don't follow along, you'll get totally lost. And so it keeps your eyes glued to the page at a consistent pace, sometimes faster than you would normally read. And there's there's like audio learning and there's learning through your eyes, visual learning happening at the same time. So you're sort of hitting your brain two different ways and just cements the information a little bit faster too.
That's awesome. And yeah, I think like one of the keys, like the key things I found with learning is how can you make it fun? How can you integrate fun in what you're trying to learn? Because if it's fun, then you download it, you imprint it, and you attain it. And it's stuck in there. So I always look for ways, like if there's something I've got to learn or I've got to learn or I want to learn, it's like, well, how can I make it more fun? And so what would be some fun ways, creative fun ways that you like to bring fun into reading?
I think reading with friends is a way to make it a little bit more fun. I've had an accountability group with some of my closer friends for years and years now. And the reason that I like to read books with my friends at the same time is because all of us read with a different perspective, with a different lens, a different pair of glasses, a different way that we see the world and the books that we're reading. And so we might read the same chapter and somebody gets a totally different takeaway or connects what they're reading to a totally different situation in their life than the rest of us. And so that's a way to make it more fun. Read with your friends. I say, you had an early version of the book. Something that I added recently in an updated version is that read this book with some of your friends. Find 4 or 5 of your most motivated friends and read this book with them. Talk about it. Have conversations, mature, personal development focused conversations. And you might start an accountability group as a result of that too. I think if you can make it fun, if you can make it conversational and lighthearted, especially if your friends have a good sense of humor and they like to joke around a little bit, that's a good way to get more out of the book. Awesome stuff. And so like, what do you think are the key takeaways from the book, Rise of the Reader? I think to read with intention, to define an intention for each book that you read. I think effective note-taking strategies. There's a difference between reading a book and taking a note. I think that repetition leads to retention. So if you can rewrite your notes a couple of times, and then you can read with the intention of teaching other people, that's a different way of retaining information and repeating it for yourself. Reviewing information over time, building an accountability tracker that you can use to measure your activity, and then building an accountability group from it as well. And so there are a bunch of other things in there, as you know. The whole back half of the book is filled with healthy, wealthy, and happy habits that I've taken from the books that I've read over time and implemented into my own life. And I talk a little bit about my personal experiences there, some good, some not so good. And I try to make everybody realize that's reading the book that we're all capable of doing more. And it doesn't have to be intimidating. It can be fun, like we're talking about right now.
Wow. Yeah, that's like I said, it's a book I highly recommend. I think it would be in my top 10 books, because if someone's out there wanting to get started, it's the perfect book. I think it should be the first book to start, because it then shows you how to absorb more of the information and actually apply and put into action the strategies, the tools, the insights from the best-selling authors that you've interviewed as well.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, that means a lot. I'm really happy that you've enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, like I said, I highly recommend it, and I definitely think everyone should go check it out, whether that's on Amazon or on your website. And so, I've just got a couple last questions, Nick. Like, if with what you've absorbed from, the insights from, Grant Cardone, Lewis Howes, and Alex Hormozi, Stephen Pressfield, Robert Greene, Ryan Holiday, like the movers and shakers of the world, like what have been the key insights that you've learned from them? What's the theme? What's the common theme that you keep seeing from these people?
It always takes longer than you think. Many of these people didn't become successful until they were well into their journey. I mean, look at Stephen Pressfield. The guy wrote for like 30 or 40 years before he made any money from his writing. You think of Robert Greene, somebody who has written 6 New York Times bestsellers so far, and his journey didn't start until he was a little bit older. I think that it always takes longer than you think. And every time I have a chance to meet and talk with and learn from these people, I realize that they're all just humans. They're all just people. They have their own insecurities. It's never as fancy as it seems. And I think that's inspirational. These are not superheroes. They're just people who stuck in the game longer than everybody else. It's a long game. They're connected to a purpose. They have a vision for what they want to do, and they work consistently at it. It's not always sexy. It's a lot of hard work, and they're just people. That's all they are. And that's motivating to me, because I know I can do that too. It's not always about talent. It's about hard work. And I know that I can put that in.
That's awesome. That's profound and powerful. And, one last thing would be, what do you think the theme of the show is called Unlocked from Within? So what does Unlocked from Within mean to you?
When I started reading these books, I realized I had unfulfilled potential. We talked about that a little bit earlier. And so that was always in me. But using the language of Stephen Pressfield, I created my own resistance. I was the one limiting myself. And so I had to unlock myself from within in order to achieve more. That meant intentionally embracing discomfort. That meant learning from the world's most successful people. That meant implementing the information that I learned from them, and changing my mindset around how I was going to do it. So yeah, it's the power is within you, and you have to defeat the resistance that you're creating that's holding you back.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Again, Nick, you've dropped some valuable information, strategies, and tools today. If anyone's listening, check out the BookThinkers podcast, and, check them out on all their socials. And, highly recommend getting Nick's book, Rise of the Reader. I think it's a must. I think it's the best starting place to start if you're on your reading journey.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm writing for those people. And listen, Marty, if anybody in your audience wants a personalized book recommendation from me, just DM me on Instagram. Tell me about the problem you're facing. Tell me about the skill you want to improve. Tell me about what's holding you back. And I might ask some follow-up questions, but I will get back to you, and I will make a recommendation, and I'll try to follow up with you too in a few months and see if you've read it and what you think about it. So yeah, that's an offer for everybody today that's listening.
Oh, that's awesome, Nick. Like, truly appreciate your time and value again today. Where else can people check you out?
I really think the best place is just on Instagram at BookThinkers. That's our most vibrant community where you're going to find the most content, and that's where you can interact with me as well.
Yep. Awesome. And you're on YouTube and all that as well. So if people want to see the video versions of the podcast, they are on there. And so, yeah, again, thank you for your time. It was awesome.
Yeah, man. Thank you for hosting such a great show and helping people unlock their potential. I think that so many of us are living under our potential, and it takes conversations like this and people like you to help them realize that. And so you're doing a good service for the world, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Nick. Take care.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to or watching another episode of Unlocked from Within. Please comment what your key takeaways was from the show. Please like and subscribe to keep up to date with when the next episode drop is. And would you please share this episode with anyone you think it may help or inspire? If you'd like to learn more about Nick and the BookThinkers team, you can check him out on Instagram as Nicholas Hutchison or on LinkedIn as Nick Hutchison. You can also find BookThinkers on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, and YouTube. The BookThinkers website is bookthinkers.com. If you'd love to check out Nick's book, you can get it on Amazon. Remember, the book is called Rise of the Reader. And again, I highly recommend it, and it's worth checking it out and utilizing the wisdom and value that Nick brings. If you feel you're stuck or have a blockage in your life and want to remove it, reach out to me at martyclay.com. I have a very unique technique that can clear blockages on a subconscious level. It's a combination of breathwork, visualization, and a guided meditation, all in one powerful and life-changing experience. Nick and the BookThinkers team have experienced the sessions and have tripled their monthly sales since the sessions with me. Again, thank you for listening to Unlocked from Within.